Hello there, sword friends. Today I'm going to tell you about this sword right here. It is an Arms & Armor Grosse-Messer Or Kriegsmesser, a custom variety from them, as I understand it, not part of their typical offering. Sword friend Ian took a lot of historical inspiration while asking for this sword, and I believe it shares a lot of proportions with a historic example, though it's got some alterations that were specific to sword friend Ian, namely that it's a left-handed example. At least I believe that's the case. I will share what information I have from a historical context in the description down below with whatever links I can come up with. The thing you should know before I continue, though, is that this is something of a review sample, though not from the manufacturer. Sword friend Ian is the patron of this video, if you will. He purchased this sword, spent his money, and I was fortunate enough to pick it up from Arms & Armor directly, right off, so to speak, the factory floor. Also know, before you hear my ramblings, I'm not an expert in this kind of stuff. I don't study historic European martial arts. I obviously swing swords around for shits and giggles, but I'm an enthusiast, and you should take what I say with that context in mind. Anyway, I'm going to ramble on about the construction quality and that kind of thing right now, and so there you go. Now you know. Radio sword friends, so this is Arms & Armor. I picked the sword up from them before the sword was finished, and I also picked the sword up when it was finished, and I made 2 trips, and I got to see this sword beforehand and afterhand in both hands. I did very poor camera work, frankly, so my apologies to Arms & Armor, to Craig specifically for the very poor camera work, and apologies to you for the poor audio, but I'm going to share some of the conversation that we had. It's edited and perused. I rambled on a lot with Craig about swords, and it was really fun, and I'm grateful for the opportunity. Unfortunately, my camera work was not exactly up to the task. Anyway, it was really cool to see the sword beforehand, afterhand, and here we go.
Finished end, where we've got kind of the soft satin finish we'll go for the whole thing, and then get the detail lines in and stuff like that. So we still got to bore our hole for the Neigl, where'd the Neigl go?
Right?
Ah, there we go.
Hey.
And we got the Neigl.
My magical finding skills.
You must be awesome at where's well
down
done.
there like that.
Groovy stuff.
So, yeah.
Is that how thick the tang is going to be?
Yeah, about that. Yep. It'll give you a sense of, what it'll feel like. So. She's beefy now, isn't she?
Oh my.
Yeah. So that's what we're going to do today. Is we're going to go in and just start taking some of this material off.
What are you going for? Like, is this just Ian's design and you're executing on it?
Well, we're working from, a piece that was historical, and then we did a reproduction of it, and he saw that and said, yeah, I want that.
I want that thing.
Yeah.
Shut up and take my money.
Yeah, exactly. So then we're working towards, and you can see it looks pretty close to what we had done in the past, but everything's based on this original piece that was made, and then what we're doing is building towards this in every respect as much as we can with the information we have, and then we're taking this, and then what we'll do is work it down to where it feels like a sword. Right now it feels a bit like a club. What I always tell the guys when I'm first instructing them is a blade should feel good in your hand with nothing on it, and then when you put the hilt and everything on, it should still feel good, right? And so the result is you end up with pieces that create a dynamic where you want your end result to really have some feel to it. So this blade is still pretty dang heavy because the edges are thick, but you can feel that even though it's got a hilt on it, it doesn't feel insanely bad. And it's just going to get better and better because we're just going to be taking weight out of that blade the whole time we're doing it.
But is the idea here to make something that looks like the historic piece, or is the idea to make something that is a copy of the?
This is pretty close to a copy as best we can tell from the images and the dimensions we have, because you don't get all the nuances. So as far as this is the result of the balance between trying to replicate a piece we had done in the past as a piece that he wanted, and he saw, and he wanted a piece like that, and then doing that to the dimensions we had for that original with how much he wanted to spend, and then making sure the blade is very, very sharp so that it can be used for test cutting and things. And so, you know, he had some specifics that way about it. Other things he was like, you know, brown wood grip, it's, you know, so.
So there's some artistic liberty in there, but you're trying to make something.
A little bit, but we're really striving to be artistic in the way the original maker was. It's kind of our goal a lot of times.
It's very imposing.
Yeah, make it.
That's a big sword.
All right, sword friends, that's all I'm going to share with you from my trips to Arms and Armor. Honestly, there was a lot more good conversation, but my camera work and conversational skills aren't necessarily up to the task. So this is about all I'm going to share, but I do want to offer special thanks to Craig for letting me show up on 2 separate occasions and rambling with me so long about swords. It was helpful for me personally, not just to see the shop, which is really cool, and to handle some other swords, and to hear the good conversation, and not just honestly to see this one sword in the before and after, and to see the weight that was taken off and the progress on the sword that was done. But it was helpful to better understand what Arms and Armor was trying to achieve when they made the sword. What I mean by that isn't just Arms and Armor's balancing Ian's expectation and budgets with their time and capability, but really how they chose to capture the spirit of the sword they were trying to make, or how they chose to produce, or what their objectives are when they make these swords. And I got a better understanding of that. Now, a lot of times in these reviews I bitch and moan and, well, or more or less point out all of the various imperfections that I see, and this review will not be any different. I'm going to do that in just a second. But it's important to note that Arms and Armor really isn't trying to do that. They're not trying to make something that's aesthetically perfect. They're not trying to make something aesthetically ugly either, but they are trying to make something that basically captures the spirit of the sword dynamically speaking. They do it to the ability that they have and the time that is warranted by the budget. And they're also trying to make something that, if transported back in time, wouldn't seem too terribly out of place. They're trying not to make it look like they work all that hard on the aesthetic perfection details. And if that's something that bothers you, then this is probably not going to be something that you will like, or not something that you might find value in. But if you like that aesthetic, then it certainly has some charm and some character, and I recognize that people do choose that actively. They might see something aesthetically crisp and clean and perfect, or at least very close to it, and something that has a little bit more handmade ruggedness to it, and those are 2 different aesthetic types. One isn't necessarily better than the other. It's a subjective thing, though arguably one does take a lot more time and probably cost more. The point is, though, that for $1,800, keep in mind that this is not an inexpensive sword, but given the amount of human interaction required, the amount of expertise, tools, all of that, $1,800 is not something that you should necessarily expect aesthetic perfection for, particularly when it requires as much human involvement as sword making does. Anyway, I am going to bitch and moan about all those little things, but I think it was important to know that ahead of time. Anyway, on with the ramblings. So we're going to start with the pommel area right here. Now, this little hook doesn't have any sharp ledges that tear into my skin. It looks pointy and sharp. It is not. All of these edges are chamfered and clean and nice and feel actually excellent in the hand. Now, the sword is heavy, so holding it like this for the purposes of the camera is not particularly fun. But you can see your pinky can rest in here, and the sword really just locks into place. It's actually pretty comfortable to hold. At this point, I've not swung it at anything, so we will see how much it bites in when push comes to shove. But at the moment, it doesn't feel like it's going to be problematic, and it really feels like I can lock it into my hand in a lot of different positions. Now you can see the tang runs through here. Here's the peen area here, and there's a few misplaced hammer marks that again go in line with that imperfection note that I touched on just a moment ago. It'd be nice if this were perfect and pristine, or had a little bit more cleanly appearance, but honestly it's not bad, and it looks like somebody hammered it on intentionally, right? This isn't dirty or bad, and none of the ledges bite into my fingers, so you can just make out in the right light that there are some hammer marks. Overall, though, the pommel has depth and dimension. It moves and has a lot of lines that really feel nice. All of them, again, are chamfered. None of them bite into my hands. They all feel nice and clean, and I really like this kind of overall pommel look. It's functional, but we will see how it holds up when I actually get to swing it around. Now, in terms of transitions to the scales here, there is a slight ledge. It's not so significant that my fingers catch on it. All the ledges are soft, and it doesn't feel like I need a glove. There's nothing that bites me here, but it is worth noting that there are some transitional ledges here that don't line up absolutely perfect. The scales, I can't remember exactly what they are made out of, but I believe tung oil has been applied. I'll put what material is used in the description down below. You can see that they're even and nice and clean, and they look really quite handsome. I think this was an aesthetic choice from sword friend Ian to use this particular color. And you can see these pegs here, these hollow areas, that they don't all line up exactly perfectly. I mean, spacing wise they're lined up, but some are bigger than others. Some have kind of little areas where they've opened up, others look perfectly placed. But you can see through, none of them are loose, none of them rise up, none of them create a hazard for my fingers or really do anything aside from, I mean, I can feel them, but none of them bite in at all. I like the grain on the wood. It has some you know, darker spots, some character that shows it's a real piece of wood. One thing worth noting here is the grip does not have any taper whatsoever. It pretty much stays the same width all the way across, the same thickness all the way across. You can make out the tang all the way through. Now the scales have some dimension to them and provide a spot for your fingers to rest. It's easy to index the handle. This is not a bad handle by any stretch of the imagination, but sometimes handles have different swells and places that allow your hands to rest differently. This does not. The finger wells allow your hand to kind of rest. Though down by the pommel, it prevents your hand from slipping off, and obviously it has this relatively unique curve here that curves forward. And again, I haven't swung the blade around, but it definitely puts your hands in a unique position, and it feels pretty interesting in my hands as I swing it around just gingerly as I've been able to. But as I spend a little bit more time with the sword, I'll hopefully get a feeling for how this grip influences the actual usage of the sword. Again, I haven't done that at this point in the review. I'll swing it around a little bit, though I would say just holding it in general, it puts your hands in a unique position, and I have to say I like it. I haven't noticed any discomfort in moving this around. I haven't noticed that it's difficult to index or keep straight. The only thing I would say is an obstacle on this is that despite the long handle, this sword is 5 pounds and it tuckers you out pretty quick. Now the next transition I want to show you is where the scales meet the crossguard area, and you can see that it appears to be done like many other messers, and that this is the base of the blade, and rather than have the shoulders of the blade kind of rest on the top of the crossguard is going across the shoulders of the blade, and then this nail is stuck through. This looks like it's pretty tight, and maybe compression fit as well, but the messers that I've seen, this appears similar to many of the other assembly methods that I've seen on different messers. Anyway, there are some kind of odd hammer marks and this and that similar to what you would have seen on the end of the pommel where the peen is, but this overall is pretty clean. Again, my fingers don't snag on anything, but I can feel a ledge. In terms of the crossguard, you can see this is a left-handed variety based on the position of where this Neigl is placed. There are tool markings and other things on the Neigl, little things from sanding, but overall the center line here is crisp and clean. The little divots, these are like little hollow ground lines here that have dimension and shape, and they're clean and well done and even. For kind of a freehand grinding Neigl, this is I would say really well done. I can make out tooling marks, but overall this looks very even and crisp and nice. The cross is quite sizable. You can make out little swells that are different in that, you know, it swells and dips in slightly different spots, but overall relatively clean and straight, and they're the same length and symmetrical in that regard. You can see there's little cutouts here. Again, nothing is unfriendly to the user. This sword doesn't bite me in any way. A lot of times little pockets like this will snag my fingernail or scratch my finger in some way, but that isn't the case on any of this. All of it is done in such a way that it's not made to bite the user. Again, what we can see here is the peen, the reverse side of the Neigl, and you can make out again some hammer marks that may not have hit their intended location the first time, and but not bad, not unclean. It's at least consistent in terms of the spots that are imperfect. They're laced throughout the sword, but they're similar, and nothing is really more drastic than the other. Nothing draws my eye as a gigantic imperfection in some way, and overall it's still, despite, you know, some misplaced hammer marks, one could categorize this as character if you like that kind of thing. Again, if you're looking for perfection, there are things on here that are imperfect, but if you like this kind of handmade aesthetic, then I think it may be a boon. The gap in the crossguard is something I think I should give Arms and Armor some praise for. I've seen many an Arms and Armor sword, and this is one of the smaller gap areas that I've seen, they tend to note that the medieval pieces varied, and that having a really small gap wasn't necessarily period correct and honestly doesn't impede performance, so why invest so much time and money in it? The point that I guess I want to draw here, though, is that in this custom variety, it is very clean and tidy in this area. It doesn't look like there's a very pronounced gap. Obviously there is one, but it's pretty small on the grand scale, and for a custom variety sword, a lot of times, you know, it can be bigger, so this looks like it has some attention to detail. You can also make out in this spot some tooling marks, some small things. Though, again, if you look at the historic examples in the Oakshott Institute, which happens to be in the same building as Arms and Armor and administered by the same people, you can see examples like this on historic pieces. So if the idea is to capture the historic aesthetic, then tool markings are not the worst thing. My perspective on that, though, is that the tool markings have to be intentional. I have to know that that's what you're going for. If you're simply incapable of perfection, and that's what you've advertised and strived to produce, and you miss the mark, then note that you missed the mark. But if you're not going for that, and you're not trying to make something aesthetically perfect, and you're trying to capture the historical aesthetic, and you see a tool mark and you leave it there because it feels like the right thing to leave there, then that's, I suppose, a designer choice, and I can't fault you for it. This is the scabbard of the sword, and I'm going to talk briefly about how it fits. This is the part of the sword I suppose I'm least enthusiastic about. I mean, it does the job, but there are some things that I might take issue with. First, a couple bits that I like. This shape, you know, has some ledges on it, and this is, I suppose, the only ledge on the blade that gives me any concern, in that along the back here, this could catch on something if you're wearing it on your hip, and there's enough of a ledge here that it could catch on something and cause issue. That said, I like the little adornment at the tip here, and overall it's well fit. If it were just a little more snug on the leather, or the leather overlapped in such a way, I think that would assuage my fears of catching it on something. The leather has some kind of blemishes to it, which add to kind of the rugged kind of aesthetic, but honestly, I would like the leather to be just a little more tidy out of the gate. These risers, again, just don't look like they're pressed as well as they could be. Again, and maybe it's an aesthetic choice, but it's pretty rugged. Along the seam, it's also not stitched. Now, this is important to note. This scabbard is $600, which is not actually a huge amount for a scabbard. That was what was charged for the custom iteration. For a big, huge scabbard like this, this is not a ton of money. So I'm not expecting perfection here. But stitching, pressing the leather a little bit, not having as many stains on the leather. The mouth, I like that this is clean and nice and has leather overlapping. I've seen much worse scabbards, much worse kind of mouth areas and scabbards that are more expensive. So this is actually a part of it that I like. But yeah, the kind of lumpiness of the leather and the kind of uneven lines here, I find it a little bit jarring, and it's not my favorite. Though, again, worth noting, this is a $600 scabbard. Many scabbards that are smaller than this, that are more refined, cost significantly more money. Now, I keep mentioning the price because it is an important factor. There are scabbards that are nicer than this for sale from a variety of different scabbard makers, but many of them cost more than $600. And this is also a relatively sizable scabbard for a relatively complex sword to make a scabbard for. It's got a curve and it's quite large. So $600 does not seem like a bad deal. I have some gripes with it, but honestly, I think overall it presents still quite a good value. The other part I want to note about the scabbard is how it lines up with the spots here. I think aesthetically this is a good choice. It seems to line up and present something very aesthetic and intentional in this regard. It also lines up pretty clean here. You can make out some of the blade underneath the scabbard, but honestly, it's not too bad. The other piece that I think bears mentioning from the scabbard is that it doesn't fall out if you turn it upside down. In fact, it doesn't move. It's really well stuck in here. This is about where the blade binds, this kind of area here. It doesn't fall out at all. I have to be really careful. This is obscenely sharp and heavy, but the scabbard is pretty loose up until this point, and then right about here, it's bound in there, and that's where it starts to stick. Pushing it in the rest of the way, it's not hard to take in and out, but it's a little rougher than maybe you would like. Though the other example of a large messer that I got to play with, again from sword friend Ian, had a different scabbard structure. It was easier to draw, but also less secure. So this iteration doesn't necessarily feel bad, depending on how ready you need to be with the scabbard. And I know it's not a Japanese katana, you don't draw it the same way, but it does bind ever so slightly. Again, in my ignorance, maybe the scabbard binding is supposed to be the way they're fit. I don't know if maybe there's just not another option, but again, just worth noting that it does rather than if it's a problem or not. Now we're going to talk about the blade, and I'm just going to cover the things I like aesthetically, what I see build quality wise, because I haven't swung it in anything yet. I haven't swung it really around freely very much, other than kind of dry handling it in enclosed spaces. But given its size and its sharpness, which I'll touch on in just a moment, I really haven't given its fair shake, dynamically speaking, or spent much time with it. But I will eventually, and I'll talk more about the dynamics later. Anyway, what I do want to talk about on the blade is just the things that I like about it. And first and foremost, this is one example of a very clean-lined example of a blade. It does have surface ripples. It's not perfect, but overall I would say this is really pretty well executed. Now, I got to see the folks at Arms & Armor grinding into it, and it didn't look this way when I saw it last. They've put a lot of attention to detail in making this big blade relatively smooth and relatively clean in the grind. Their hands are much steadier than mine, for certain. Now, this false edge is not sharp. You can see the fuller area here. And you can see they terminate in about the same spot, though there's some slight variations in the fuller. The fuller also has a lot more ripple in the surface than the rest of the sword. Interestingly, it maintains about the same thickness all the way through the blade. It doesn't have a pronounced distal taper, nor does it have a pronounced just general taper throughout the blade. It stays pretty consistent and thick until it comes to about this clipped point here. And it's at this point where the distal taper begins to change. You can see it stays pretty uniform in terms of its thickness all the way throughout the blade. It also comes down to a relatively fine point, and while it does have what appears to be a secondary bevel, it's very minor, and I would say this feels very sharp at a glance. The polish is kind of a satined polish, and it has some oil on it, which might be showing up in blemishes, but the polish is also pretty consistent. It's not a mirror polish, but it's shinier than like a 400 or 600 grit. Overall, it has a very handsome presence. There's not really much in the way of blemishes either. You can make out some imperfections, which are likely due to kind of rubbing in the scabbard or that type of thing, but overall I would say it's pretty minor. The blade is difficult for me to fit in the whole frame here, at least as I have my camera positioned. Overall, I'm very happy with how everything turned out aesthetically speaking, and I think the folks at Arms & Armor were too. They seem to say that they produced the sword that they wanted to make, and overall I think this is a very handsome, well executed sword, at least as I'm able to tell. Nothing about it feels cheap or crappy or not akin to the price that's asked for it. Now, this is $1,800 just for the sword itself, and another $600 for the scabbard. And I would say that seems completely fair given the custom nature of this sword, its size, and the challenge presented in making it. Overall, it seems to be a really well crafted blade. Ooh, that's nice. What a charming sound. Anyway, I'll get to play with this more in just a moment, but overall, before I swing it at anything, before it gets any cutting scratches or blemishes or imperfections, I thought I would share it with you in its most pristine condition as I've gotten it from Arms & Armor. Anyway, that's where I am at this point in the review. I would have to say my initial impressions, my first thoughts, just going over the general aesthetics without actually putting it through its paces or handling it very much, seems to be really overall very positive. It's a very handsome looking sword. It seems to mirror the historical inspiration, or at least touch on a lot of points that from the sword that it draws its inspiration from. And it seems well executed, well built, and at a price point that doesn't seem outrageous given the scope of what's entailed in making a sword of this size. Anyway, those are my thoughts right now, but I'm going to go put it through its paces and see what happens. Alright there, sword friends. So I'm going to do some cutting right now. I have a used Japanese tatami mat. These have been soaked for a couple days, and basically they're tatami mats of the used variety, which means they're a little potentially more difficult to cut than tatami mats where they knew they were in Japan absorbing foot oils and stuff, and sometimes that can make them more difficult to cut. So know that it's that variety. I'm using Swordfriend Ian's Messer, and my garage door opener is right here. So I could whack it if I really do a fully extended cut, so I'm not going to be giving it my all. Keep that in mind as you see me swinging the sword. I shouldn't need to though. A sword of this size, I would imagine I would want to keep extended. I could whack, but I shouldn't need to really cleave it. Also, it seems obscenely sharp. So we will see if that proves to be true. That's nice. See, I'm not giving it a lot of oomph here. I was able to keep the tip, at least what I think was, in a pretty close spot. I didn't swing all the way through and whack into the ground. Now this, I have to be a little cautious and whack the tip. Wow. That was a bad cut. It scalloped, but it still moved through. All that is disappointing. Not that it didn't cut through, but that I hit it hard enough to break my peg. Let's see if I can get a little bit of photo. You can see there's a wooden dowel in there. Now it's certainly cut in, but not enough to make it through the mat, though my form will probably be the issue there. And I don't know if that's what I'm supposed to be cutting with it or not. I'm cutting in what in Japanese terms would be the manauchi. I'm cutting kind of right in here, that top third of the blade. Maybe I should be cutting a little closer. Certainly a good cut. That was, as you can see, not horizontal. And just for craps and giggles, let's see how well it would cut through fabric. So I have a, yes, it is an old pair of my pants. How do we do? Well, the pigment break. My denim is unscathed. I've got a couple minor tears here, but it looks like my double tatami mat has gone. No such luck. The fabric seems unaffected. A little looser and tighter at the same time. So now the tatami mat appears to be a single one. We have loose fabric, single tatami mat. So we cut in to the tatami mat, but we didn't pierce the denim. I suppose I should bring the camera closer for this. So you can see it cut in slightly, but obviously if that were you under there, you'd be unhappy anyway. So as I rewrap this tatami mat, some quick thoughts on what's happened there. So cutting through denim is a tricky thing. It's a resilient fabric, and so, well, it's no surprise that it didn't cut through. I am also limited in my technique and power here. I can't really give it the old college try, so to speak, because, because as I've noted earlier, the garage doesn't really allow me that. But I will try effectively a double wrap mat. This is the chunk that I failed to cut through before. We will see if I am successful now. Yes, I am successful. It's also cutting very clean angles. This looks like well, I think I'm cutting a clean angle, but it's cutting relatively effectively here on this mat. This fell to the floor, but you can see it's not tearing. The cuts seem pretty good. What if I stand closer and drag it through? Okay, sword friends, so this is all the cutting I'm going to do, and in terms of swinging it around, I will include the weapon dynamics computer, but I'm not going to give you footage of me swinging it around outside of this cutting session. Hopefully what you've seen already is helpful enough. I will include measurements, all of that in the description down below, but I don't really have space to move it around, and given I'm not an expert at how to use these, I don't know how helpful it would be. What I will tell you is for 5 pounds, my arms aren't tired yet. When I was doing the weapon dynamics calculations and stuff, my arms really wore out pretty quickly, but I'm not super tired from the minimal amount of cutting that I've done thus far. It was really fun. It feels surprisingly comfortable in the hand, and it cuts really well. Don't be dissuaded by not cutting through pants. Again, garage, limited amount of force, limited amount of skill, and that's a tough cut to do. Regardless, if you haven't done that, take some old pants, throw it over your water bottles or conventional targets, and see how well you do. All right, sword friends, I'm going to wrap up this review and give you my final thoughts on do I think the sword is worth it or not. In a nutshell, I'm going to separate it into 2 separate categories: the scabbard, which is a maybe, and the sword, which is a definite yes. To elaborate, I've already explained why I like or don't like the scabbard. I just think that there are some things that they could have done better, which wouldn't have cost really much more or taken much more time, though I say that as somebody without any experience in making these. So I guess take that for what it's worth. That said, the scabbard at $600 represents a pretty fair deal to me. I don't think it's bad. Just wouldn't be the aesthetic choice that I would have made, and it lacks some of the refinement that I suppose I would have liked to see even in a scabbard at that price point. That said, I do want to make clear, I think it's fair. This is a budget scabbard. It's meant to be a budget scabbard, and it certainly achieves it. It's not an easy thing to do, and I recognize that, so I don't think it's bad. Just wouldn't be the choice I would personally make. The sword itself, though, I think is absolutely worth the $1,800 asked. In fact, I would say that this, if it were off-the-shelf piece from Arms & Armor, would certainly be worth $1,800. It represents a sword that dynamically feels like a weapon. How historic or unhistoric it is, I guess I really can't say because I don't have anything to compare it to. But if you have knowledge on that, well, the weapon dynamics computer is there. You can tell me. Anyway, as a sword, it feels like a weapon. It's balanced. It doesn't feel clubbish. I got a chance to feel it before it was made, and it certainly felt clubbish then. The refinement that was put in the sword is certainly apparent. Arms & Armor understands how a sword is supposed to balance and dynamically feel, and I think that expertise and know-how was certainly put into this product. And so if it were an off-the-shelf piece, yes, I would say it's worth it. But it's not an off-the-shelf piece. It's a custom piece, and that means that Arms & Armor doesn't have the economies of scale that come with making a sword over and over and over again, or having it be a standard product line. It takes some additional expertise and skill and time and all of that to make a sword like this, and to have a left-handed messer of this size and quality made for $1,800 seems to represent a very positive, very good value to me. More so if you like what you see here and you appreciate the characteristics on it, it may be a case for you to contact Arms & Armor and see what they could do on your custom sword project. Now, it does mean that you have to resign to some of the aesthetic choices that they make and some of the imperfections that come with them, but well, maybe it doesn't. It depends, I suppose, on your budget, because it certainly seems like they're capable of doing more if you want to spend it to justify the time. Anyway, overall, I think this is an excellent sword package. I really like the sword. I'm really especially thankful to Arms & Armor for letting me come down and ramble and see and learn from the experience. Also to Sword Friend Ian for sending me this sword, trusting me with this property, and letting me take so very long to make this review. So special thanks to those two folks. Anyway, that's all I have for you. I hope the video's been interesting. If you have any questions, comments, throw them down below. And as always, cheers, and thanks for watching.